All right, we have a reaction video for you today. I know it's been so long, but we are back. And today we have Jordan Peterson on Chris Williamson. These are two of my favorite podcasters in general, so I know it's going to be a big hit. I'm going to get it right into it, but before I do, I would like to ask if anyone has any updates or knows what's going on with Jordan Peterson's psychology license. I know he had it potentially getting revoked. I think he's fighting that. I haven't stayed in touch too much in that regard, so really don't know. If you have any idea, thoughts, opinions, updates, anything of the liking, feel free to let me know. But more importantly, let's get right to it.
Given that we're in a world which is comfortable and we have created buildings in which there are heavy things that you pick up and put down in the same place because it's simply so rare that you have to pick up heavy things, right?
Right.
The
We have
proliferation,
speed bumps on our roads for the same reason.
proliferation of ice baths and sauna
Yeah.
and even reading to some extent, reading difficult things. Where should people go given that they are in a world which is more comfortable than ever before? Where should they go to encourage them to find difficult things?
Truth.
Okay.
Truth is what's optimally difficult. The truth is optimally difficult. It's a really wonderful thing to know.
Obviously, truth can be very obscure. Not going to get into that as of right this moment, but I do want to question the notion of comfortability in and of itself. I think comfort is highly dependable on our relationship to pleasure, for example, where comfort might not simply just mean sitting down, being lazy, and feeling good in that regard. Comfort could literally be the pursuit of something difficult as well, right? So I think it all is semantics here, and in terms of how we're defining comfort, especially in a world where there is so much more abundance, accessibility, and so forth. But comfort is very intriguing because someone who is someone who is in a state of, let's say, flow, or is in a state of constant progression, that technically is their equilibrium, so is therefore their comfort zone. You could think of comfort possibly as what your default might be, right? Because there's no excess energy being released, or you're not necessarily forcing yourself to get out of your comfort zone, right? So you can go to the gym at 4 a.m. and do the cold plunge and everything that the Huberman lovers are talking about right now, but that could also technically be comfortable in comparison to what the alternative of doing nothing is and not feeling any progression in your life. Because I think that where we gain and glean the most positive emotion, and I think Jordan Peterson, he talks quite highly about this, is to aim up and have a vision for your life. And that adventure is what is going to mold your character. And that sense of progression is what's going to yield so many positive feelings, outcomes, benefits. Now, I know, just as a baseline for the sake of this argument and conversation, they're typically talking about comfort by way of, okay, sitting down, relaxing, whatever hits the dopamine system with the least amount of output. So sitting, watching Netflix, scrolling on your phone. This is highly accessible, very easy, and it triggers the brain in a way where you don't need too much output, too much energy expenditure, right? But I do want to just question again that notion, because comfort can also be your default if you make it habitual. Comfort could also be your default if it relates to your sense of identity. And if you view yourself, for example, as an athletic person in the world, then that will be more comfortable to you to pursue the athletic acts. Because the thing is, psychologically speaking, Jordan knows this better than anyone, we want to have congruence with our internal mindset and our external experience. So when we start to focus on what it is to craft that ideal individual in our own minds and have that represented out in the world, that is actually technically more comfortable. You don't have the cognitive dissonance there. So just something to keep in mind, and I think could actually be helpful when creating new habits. So you don't always have to go against the grain, but it's more so of an alignment between who you are and how you act yourself out in the world. I actually have this written right up here in my mirror. I know you can't see it, but it says thoughts, feelings, and actions. And for me, this is so important because when you align these, you become so incredibly effective in the world.
It's adventure. There's no distinction. Partly because if you're going to just say what you believe to be true, you have to let go of the consequences. You can't predict the consequences. Well, there's no difference between not being able to predict the consequences and having an adventure. They're the same thing, right?
Because
So
if you
don't know
knew the
what's gonna
consequences,
happen.
it wouldn't be an adventure.
It's not an adventure if the consequences are foregone.
The same as it's no sacrifice or courage if there's no risk.
Right.
Quickly, what do you think about that? I somewhat agree to a degree. I do think that obviously it wouldn't be an adventure if you knew the outcome of the consequences already, hence why it would be fun and enticing. It has an element of surprise, but I do think that you must have some regard for consequences in the adventure, or else your risk may start to outweigh the benefit. And if you don't have that self-awareness to at least pin the two together, I think you might actually be setting yourself up for defeat. I might be misconstruing what he's saying here, though, but I think it's very tricky, because speaking your truth, or a truth, let's say if there's a truth that is objective, in the face of someone who completely disagrees with it, or where it would defeat their self-view, can be beneficial if they're willing to take on that as a challenge. But if they feel like they're antagonized, the truth of the situation is that you don't end up getting along, and there's really no effective output from that. I mean, that's how it seems with a lot of common discourse today, is everything seen as a good guy, bad guy, attack here, attack there. I obviously wish it to be so much different, but I think that the consequences must be considered by understanding who your audience is and how they're going to relate to the supposed truth. Now, speak your truth, be your truth, of course, that is steady advice. I wouldn't diverge from that. I think the concern here is that we have the opportunity to just spew our opinion despite any possible consequence, especially because of the anonymity online. And I think that lack of understanding the person in front of you, the lack of understanding your audience, is where you get that friction in discourse and conversation. So yes, your truth is imperative. Your truth is who you are and who you should express no matter what the external environment is. But I do think we have to have an understanding of who we're speaking to, so it could be taken in the utmost receptive way in that adventure. So that I think adventures constitute all parties, or the parties at least playing the game are benefiting from. If you're the only one partaking in the adventure and growing from it, at the end of the day, you're going to sit on the hill for, possibly in a lonely position, and at what cost? So I think that should also be entered into the equation. But let's, of course, hear more of what he has to say about it.
It's exactly the same. And so it's a wonderful thing to know that optimized adventure is to be had in the truth. Think in every given situation. So Christ says in the Sermon on the Mount that to orient yourself properly, and it's often viewed as this hippie paean. Take no thought of the moral will take care of itself. God takes care of the sparrows, he'll certainly take care of you. It's like a hippie wet dream. That isn't the core of the message. The core of the message is very straightforward. Christ says, aim up to the highest thing you can possibly imagine. So that's the relationship with God. You put what's at the pinnacle, properly at the pinnacle, and you aim at that. And then you concentrate that, and it's that, and treating other people like you would like to be treated yourself. That sets the moral frame. Then you attend to the day and the cares of the day. It's like once you've established the proper moral frame, you pay attention to the day and you live in truth. And that moves you towards that destination. You have to have the orientation right. You have to be aiming up. Mm-hmm. But then it's just a matter of, what would you say, abiding by the truth. That's the logos that sets people free. And that's right.
Doing it properly, right? There was one of the other rules that didn't make it into your book. Nothing well done is insignificant.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Nice.
Yeah, well, you accrue. So Christ tells his followers in the Gospels to.
That's actually pretty inspiring. But I want to get back to something he said regarding treating others the way you'd like to be treated. This is almost like folklore. We've heard it our whole lives, and it definitely spawns from this idea of a sense of community and well-being amongst everyone. And again, granted, that is ideal. And I think the game we should all be playing. Excuse me. However, what if you're a masochist? That's the one thing I've never really understood. And again, I don't mean to overthink, overlook, or misconstrue that notion, but I've always considered treat others, if the highest aim or the highest value in your value system is to treat others as you'd like to be treated, how do you know that you're the best judge of how others and yourself should be treated, especially if you lack self-awareness? It's like we should probably all be taking a self-questionnaire to see how adept we are in understanding ourselves, to know what we really need and what we really want, because we often degenerate into regressive behaviors easily, into destructive behaviors. And I don't see how that could be an effective lens to look at and how to treat other people. Now, of course, there's this common morality. You can say, okay, you don't want to be harmed physiologically, physically, mentally, physiologically and physically the same thing, sorry, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in any way. You don't want to be harmed at all. So of course you do not want to espouse that or put that out into other people. But I think that that's just a baseline understanding of what it means to treat someone. We're humans. We're not just animals. So there's a respect, there's composure, there's pride and praise. There's an understanding of one's psychological makeup that allows them to fulfill, again, their identity or their vision for the world. So it's very tricky to say, okay, you know what's best for yourself, because first of all, you really might not. We really all need to be asking ourselves this question. What do we really want, and why do we really want it? And dig as deep as you can without just tumbling over your words, without just thinking too deep into things that don't need to be thought of. And I'm no psychologist, so I'm not going to parse that for myself or anyone here right now, but I do think, again, it's so incredibly necessary to know what it is that is of your utmost benefit first. And then I think once you work on that, you can also emanate that to other people, honestly, naturally. It doesn't even have to be another action. It's a swift motion. When you work on yourself to your highest degree, with actually knowing what you want and why you want it, and share that amongst others, my goodness, I think if we all paid more attention and put more energy into doing that, that's really what I think would make the world a much better place exponentially. But let's hear what the professor has to say.
Store up treasure in heaven, not in the places that moths can eat and rust can destroy. Well, what is that? What is meant by that? Well, it's meant by it means the same thing that you just pointed to, which is that if you run yourself through a disciplinary process, so you accomplish something, maybe you don't attain the goal you were aiming at, but you accrue a new way of looking at the world and a set of skills. Well, if you just keep doing that, you have multiple ways of looking at the world and more skill.
Nice.
Well, that's your storehouse of treasure. The reason women use wealth as a proxy for attractiveness is because wealth is a proxy for competence. It's not competence, because you can be rich and useless. Now, it's not that easy, but it can at least happen temporarily. But women use markers of wealth to assess competence. And the competence is the treasure, not the wealth. Because if you're competent, you could be thrown into the desert and you'll make it bloom.
I've said this about people that go to the gym. So from the outside, someone that goes to the gym and has got a good body or whatever, there's the body, and this is what you get to touch during sex and when you're intimate, right? But the story that someone who has a good body tells you about the sort of person that they are is much more important, I think, than the way that it manifests physically. It's someone who is reliable, who is able to overcome hard things, who is self-disciplined.
Disciplined.
Yeah,
it's a marker
it's
for
just
discipline.
this whole big, long laundry list of things. They're able to deal with pain and discomfort, which is kind of sexy in a way.
All great stuff that we're hearing. And I feel like I'm in a disagreeable mood today because I don't want to retract anything that they're saying or necessarily combat it. But this is so interesting because this is something I was thinking about not too long ago and talking to a buddy about, is this idea of understanding someone's level of discipline by their body, let's say. And of course, it is a marker, but I think that there's so many layers deeper than that, in that there are so many gym bros out there who really are not disciplined in any other area of their life. So how are they able to be so well disciplined, so fixated, so perseverant in this one task that is, highly valued among society, but then everything else seems to fall into the gutter? And then vice versa, there are people who are just complete brainiacs, let's say, or who are working on computational problems all day, but they just cannot stick with the gym schedule, even if they do have the time for it. So I do actually, my buddy, what he said as a combat to what I'm saying here is that it seems correct because, of course, people can be disciplined in varying ways. However, it's just one of the markers to see if they are disciplined or not, at least in some way, shape, or form, because you see it physically right away without actually getting to know the person. And that is fair. Now, I would just like to ask further, and for each of us to ask ourselves, what are some of the things that we are disciplined about, even potentially naturally, where it doesn't even have to feel like discipline, or again, you're trying to go against the grain, back to like we talked about comfort. But in other areas, you fall short. And I think it has something to do, Huberman talks a lot about this, a lot of references today, but about this concept of how our brain is really just a reward system. And we're rewarded and positively reinforced on the things that make us feel good and where we're feeling that sense of progress. And I think that's so interesting because, you can tackle a task, whether it may be difficult, particularly at first, which most tasks and skills are. But what's so interesting is when we do exhibit this great sense of discipline, it may not carry forth in other areas of our lives. And it's almost like it's not even discipline at that point, because discipline seems to allude to the fact that you have to go against what is difficult in relation to what is typically comfortable. So if you're going against something that is difficult, that will take willpower and therefore discipline. But if it happens naturally for you, like you practice playing an instrument for a day, or you're going to the gym, these things might not even evoke much discipline out of you because it's what you're typically being rewarded to do. Again, we have that positive reinforcement mechanism within us, and it's how we shape ourselves and how we view ourselves at the end of the day. So again, it is very complementary of this idea of what really is comfortable, what really is difficult, no matter how typically difficult it is on the objective realm. But in the subjective realm, that those weightings and those bearings can be completely different for us. So is it really discipline? Is it really discomfort at that point, even if it's more natural to us? Or would you simply say that discipline is just the urge to get going towards something that is difficult, and therefore build more habits out of it and find success within it?
Well, and it's the perfect materialist disciplinary strategy, right? Because it's very concrete. Well, you change your body. It's like, is that a spiritual pursuit? Well, it is insofar as it requires, long-term discipline and sacrifice. And you might hope, and I think this is likely the case, that, you can get stuck in the bodily self-improvement niche and focus on that too obsessively, but you can also use it as a stepping stone to discipline pursuit itself. And lots of people do that.
I think I told you the last time that we chatted about the manopause, this thing that I'd come up with. So I noticed toward the end of my 20s that lots of guys who had been training with a particular modality, usually bodybuilding, usually exclusively for the way that they looked, realized as they approached their 30s that they were getting out of breath going up a set of stairs, and that they maybe couldn't touch their toes, and they looked fantastic, but no, they just felt like they should maybe start to value different things. And they then changed their training, and they would go and do Brazilian jiu-jitsu or yoga or CrossFit or some other form of whatever. And that precipitated a change in everything else. And I saw this in myself, right? I get toward the end of my 20s. I've achieved success in many of the ways that society tells a young man that he should value success. There was a discordance. Something felt off. And you then think, okay, well, maybe I need to assess whether or not the things that I've been told I should want are things that I actually want to want.
There we go. That's
and very quickly you realize, I don't know, it feels like a quarter-life crisis. I think so many men go through this. They go, I either succeeded or didn't succeed at a game that I was told that I was supposed to value playing, and upon reflection, I really don't care for it as much as I thought I did. Maybe there was some elements. I was so proud of what I'd done with my business partners. I was so proud of the things that we'd achieved. Nice. But then there was other stuff where I was like, why have I attached so much of my sense of self-worth into this and this and this?
They are sharp. They know what they're talking about. And yeah, you see how Jordan had then alluded to the fact that it can then be spread out into other areas of your life. But I do think that requires some sense of will and intention. Again, just trying to question these notions and what we think of them, because things that are seen as difficult for some may not be seen as difficult for others. But as humans altogether, there is a general consensus of what is difficult, especially because we have physical bodies, so we know when there is pressure on it. But I do think more than just the emotion or the physiological response that we have to the difficulty, I think it's more so the relationship, the mental relationship we have to these things that largely dictates our approach to them, and how natural they then become to us based out of habit and identity and all these things that we've talked about. So what is it that you like to do to put yourself in uncomfortable positions? Because we all know that there is a large benefit in getting comfortable being uncomfortable because of the vast unknown in life, and it's so hard to predict. So you need to be ready for any variable that may arise, and you need to become a formidable opponent against that unknown. You're pretty much hedging your bet against your future self or the future outcomes of life by being as present as you can in the moment and as strong as you can in the moment. And this does take a lot of willpower. This takes a lot of focus. And then hopefully that then becomes your default, and you will become unstoppable. So I'm excited for you, and I'm trying to integrate some of these things myself in my life, and it's becoming more of a focus as I get older. But yeah, we'll be on to the next one. Another reaction video for you guys coming soon. Let me know what you guys think, and feel free to shout out some ways that you add some difficulty into your day. So talk soon. Thank you, everyone.